Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. A warm welcome, family, friends, to this very special Azkara for Dr. Sheldon Meth, Zichrono Livracha, Shlomo Zalman ben Yitzchak Isaac. The Azkara is a long way in the making. Last year, just at this time, it was hard to get a minyan for Kaddish. And we give a lot of credit and appreciation to Marcia for your determination, creating this very precious program that's planned today. If I may start with the shul perspective and then move on to the very personal family perspective, Sheldon's being missing has left a very, very personal loss in our shul that cannot even properly be assessed or stated. Sheldon was in charge of the Zmanim, but in a greater sense, the Itim and the Zmanim, the good counsel, the influence, the good judgment that would have been so valuable during this difficult time that we're all experiencing, is something that we really miss. If I could borrow the expression from Tfilas Yom HaKippurim, Vayevukash ve'einenu. I turned to my side, as I did for years, being able to reach out at arm's length and ask Dr. Meth what he thought about something. And there's a lot to ask about. We live in a time where it's confusing. A smile of warmth, of wisdom, of the awareness of the eternity of the Jewish people that helps us weather the ups and downs would go a long way. And we know B'siyata D'Shmaya will proceed with caution, with good judgment, as a Jewish motto. And he should continue to be a Melitz Yosher for the family, for the shul, and for all of Klal Yisrael. I'd like to share one machshava, one thought, before we hand it over to the Siyum and to some wonderful recorded and live presentations. Sheldon once shared that when he was graduating yeshiva and heading off to college, the Rebbe went around the classroom and asked each student, each Talmud, where they were headed and what they were planning to do. And when the Rebbe got to Sheldon and he heard his plans to go to college, to become a scientist, the Rebbe said, "Meth, you're a goner." Years later, he told me the story with a smile. He considered it an endearing and charming anecdote. He knew the love of the Rebbe. He understood what the Rebbe was worried about. He figured you take a Ben Torah and you dump him into the world of science, out of the yeshiva. Who knows what'll be with him? Meth, you're a goner. All the yeshiva, all the Torah, all the mitzvahs. What's going to be with you? Shlomo HaMelech tells us in Mishlei, Hochach l'chacham v'yeh haveka. If you rebuke a wise man, he hears what you're saying. He takes it to heart. And he loves you all the more for it. And that was Dr. Meth. He understood the concern. And he made sure that that fear never happened. He carried that warning with him joyously for life and achieved the harmony of Hashem's creation, of mitzvahs, and of all of the relevant scientific disciplines, all harmoniously under the banner of being an Eved Hashem. I understood the story a little bit better when, at the time of the Petira, Leah shared how when she visited him in his office, she was always struck how he prominently displayed his Sfarim, Gemara, Tanakh, just very comfortable, very harmoniously. The expression, the work of his life. As a Torah Jew, Gemara, Tanakh, Hashkafa, Musar, all blending into one beautiful service dedicated to Hashem. He should be a Melitz Yosher, Yehi Zichro Baruch. We begin the program with a video of grandson David Kramer's Siyum on Maseches Psachim.
The last Gemara in Psachim talks about the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben and who makes the brachos of Pidyon Haben. So this is the last Gemara. Rabbi Simlai iklo the Pidyon Haben. So Rabbi Simlai went to a Pidyon Haben by Minei, and the people at the Pidyon Haben asked him, Pshita, it's obvious to us how Pidyon Haben on the Pidyon Haben Asher Kiddushan Mitzvah Zivana al Pidyon Haben. Avi Ben Mivarch. The father makes the bracha on the mitzvah of the Pidyon Haben. The bracha of Shechiyanu, Kain Mivarch, does the Kain make the blessing, or Avi Ben Mivarch, or does the father of the son make the bracha? Kain Mivarch, the Kamati Hana Liyade, does the Kohen who gets money, he's getting the money from the father, does he make the bracha? Or Avi Ben Mivarch, the Ovid Mitzvah, or does the father make the bracha because he's the one that gets the mitzvah? So Lo Havi Biyadai, he didn't know the answer. Rabbi Simlai, he didn't know the answer. So also he left and Shal Bei Midrasha, and he asked it in Beis Medrash. So Amrullah, they said to him, Avi Ben Mivarch, that the father is the one that makes the bracha. Avi Ben Mivarch Shtaim, that the father makes the bracha Shtaim, and he's motzi the Kohen, because technically they both have to make the bracha of Shechiyanu, but who should be motzi who? So they said that the father should. The Hilchos on the Lacha is Avi Ben Mivarch Shtaim, and the father he makes the bracha and motzi the Kohen. So this Gemara needs a little explanation. Firstly, what's the suffix of whether the father makes the bracha or whether the Kohen makes the bracha? And secondly, why does it say at the end of the Gemara that the father is Mivarch Shnayim? We already know that he makes the bracha on the mitzvah at the beginning when they said Pshita. Our only suffix is on the last bracha of Shechiyanu. So there's a pshat in the Sharim Mitzinu B'Halacha that the suffix is whether, on one hand, does the father make the bracha, because since he's losing money, even though he's losing money, he's doing a mitzvah. Or does the Kohen make the bracha because he's financially benefiting from the money? He's getting money from the father. So he answers that we're machshav the performance of the mitzvah over the monetary benefit of the Kohen, and the father makes the bracha. Because since the father is making the bracha, he's making the bracha on the mitzvah of Asher Kishanu, and this highlights the fact that he's doing the mitzvah. If we gave the Shechiyanu to the Kohen, it would look like we're preferring the financial benefit of the Kohen getting the money from the father. So we give the Shechiyanu to the father as well. And that answers up, that's why we say Mivar Shtaim, it's the bracha that gives him the first bracha is the bracha that gives him the right to make the second one, the Shechiyanu. The Sefer HaChinuch says that the primary reason for Pidyon Haben and the Kedushas Bechoros is to realize that everything in the world is Hashem, and whatever possession Hashem gives us, even though we worked for it or we don't, it's really Hashem's. And we give in Pidyon Haben, we give the firstborn to Hashem to express our recognition of this inyan, and that behind everything physical there's a spiritual source, and it is from Hashem. These ideas that we value the physical aspect of life, the finances, but not at the expense of the spiritual, the mitzvah, and that even the physical world is rooted in the spiritual one, is something that we all struggle and we must strive to grow in. My Zaidi, Shlomo Zalman ben Yitzchak Isaac, Zatzal, was someone who lived his life in both worlds. He was extremely successful in his field of work and had a lot of achievements in the physical world as a physicist. However, with his successes, including patents and high-level contributions to the national security, both in America and Israeli ones, he never lost track of the fact that the Iker is the world of Ruchnius, and he saw the physical world for what it is, a creation of Hashem that can be used to help us be better Ovdei Hashem, and not for just the physical pleasures. May the Hashem have an aliyah and ascend in the Olamas, just as he strove to elevate this world from a physical one to a spiritual one. Hadron Allah Pesach Pesach Ma'arch Chalon Dait and Allah Pesach Pesach and Dait Chalon Lo Nisla Shem Minach Pesach Pesach V'Lo Sis Nishi Minan Boma Adim V'Lo Boma De'asi Hadron Allah Pesach Pesach Ma'arch Chalon Hadron Allah Pesach Pesach and Dait Chalon.
We wish a big Yasher Koach on the Siyum. Big thank you. And you should have a lot of nachas. We have the privilege at this time to share video messages from children. First, Rabbi Avi Meth of Boca Raton, and then Rabbi Nachum Meth of Las Vegas.
One of the well-known traits of my father, Zichrono Livracha, was that he was both a Talmid Chacham and a brilliant scientist. He was so thrilled when he would find examples of when these two worlds would collide, such as his calculation of Noach's Teva, the weight of Noach's Teva, based on Archimedes' principle, or his unique understanding of the idea of Aron Noseus Nosav. Basically, he calculated how much the Aron should have weighed and realized that there's no way that the tabaos of the Aron, the rings, would have been able to support it. The fact that when the Aron was picked up, the rings didn't just snap right off is because the Aron carried itself. Now, part of that cheshbon in how much the Aron weighed was based on how much the luchos weighed. The luchos that were made out of sapphire were stored inside the Aron, and they were extraordinarily heavy. Yesterday we read about how Moshe destroyed the first set of luchos. I'd like to share with you a fascinating gur aryeh that demonstrates just exactly how much those luchos did weigh in a different kind of a sense. And from there, we can focus on another major aspect of what my father meant to us and what he passed on to us. Rashi quotes a Gemara in Shabbos to explain why Moshe broke the luchos when he saw Bnei Yisrael worshipping the Egel HaZahav. He made a kal v'chomer from Karban Pesach. He reasoned that we know the halacha is by a Karban Pesach, kol ben nechar lo yochal bo. Somebody who's rejected Yiddishkeit is not allowed to eat from the Karban Pesach. So Moshe made an extension and a logical jump and said that if this one mitzvah is usher to somebody who is a mummer, then certainly I can't give the entire Torah, which is represented by these luchos, to Klal Yisrael after this terrible aveira that they did. Tosfos over there in Shabbos says that it's not really 100% complete kal v'chomer. Tosfos says that Torah is much different than the one mitzvah of Karban Pesach. The Torah has the power to infuse people with the ability to do tshuva for their aveiros, to be machzer lehem lemutav. So just because a mummer can't eat the Karban Pesach doesn't mean that Klal Yisrael shouldn't get the luchos. In fact, perhaps they should specifically get the luchos so that they will be able to do tshuva. Comes along the gur aryeh, and he says no. There is a perfect kal v'chomer from Karban Pesach to the giving of the luchos and the giving of the Torah. The fact that the Torah would get Klal Yisrael to do tshuva is irrelevant. If it's usher to get the Torah because they're rebellious, just like it's usher for somebody who's rebellious to eat the Karban Pesach, then it's usher. If it's usher, period. The ends don't justify the means. Fascinating thing we see from this gur aryeh about despite the fact that the Torah has such a power, the kal v'chomer is in place. If it's usher to eat from the Karban Pesach for such a person, so certainly Klal Yisrael can't get the Torah. As an aside, for those of you who are interested in Kal V'chomers and know the halachos of Dayo Lovo Min Adin, the Gur Aryeh goes on and says maybe you'll have a question on this Kal V'chomer, and say that bottom line is that somebody who is usher to eat the Karban Pesach because he's a mummer can still at least learn the halachos of the Karban Pesach. So perhaps, even though you want to learn a Kal V'chomer from Pesach to Kol HaTorah Kula, but the thing you're learning from, the Karban Pesach, a mummer is still allowed to learn. So how can you learn from there, even if there is a Kal V'chomer, how can you learn from there that you can't give the Torah to be learned to Klal Yisrael? And the Gur Aryeh says, no, it's still a valid Kal V'chomer, because the fact that the mummer is still allowed to learn, it's because he was always allowed to learn. He always had the Torah. Now he became a mummer, so he becomes prohibited to eat the Karban Pesach. The fact that he can still learn about the Karban Pesach is because he had that to begin with, and it was never taken away. But over here, the decision is that Moshe is making is, should Klal Yisrael get the Torah in the first place? And if it's usher, then it's usher. If you learn from Karban Pesach that mitzvah is usher to a mummer, so this Kol HaTorah Kula should be usher to be given in the first place to Klal Yisrael, then even though it's true that a mummer can learn, but that's something he always had that we're not going to take away. Here the question is, should we give them the Torah to begin with and give them this power to learn, and as Tosfos says, the power to possibly do tshuva with that learning? And the Gur Aryeh says, no, the Kal V'chomer says you can't. Now, of course, we all know, end of the day, somehow, we did manage to get the Torah back. How is perhaps a different discussion, but the bottom line is, now Hashem did give us this tremendous matana of the Torah, which is the refuah to the Yetzer Hara, barasi Yetzer Hara, barasi Torah Tavlan. It is the thing that allows us the ability to conquer our Yetzer Hara. It is the thing that allows us the ability to do tshuva when we do averos. And we see from this Gur Aryeh just exactly how precious and how, so to speak, heavy it was, how much those luchos really weighed. It was representing this tremendous power, this tremendous gift, this matana that Hashem gave us, and He returned to us even after we did the terrible avera of the Chet HaEgel. If there's one thing that was the most significant trait of my father, Zichrono Livracha, is the fact that he understood that it was his primary mission to be able to give over the Masorah of the Torah that he received from his parents, to be able to learn as much as he could and transmit that Masorah of the Torah, the primacy of Torah, the beauty of Torah to his children, and not just to transmit it to us, but to transmit it to us in a way that we would feel the achrayus to then go ahead and transmit it to our children in such a way that they would feel the achrayus to transmit it to their children. And so, during this second Yahrzeit, if there's one thing that we can keep in mind and to try to follow in Abba's footsteps, it is to take this responsibility very seriously, to be able to give over to our children the Masorah that he received from his parents and gave to us in such a manner, again, that they will pass it on to their children and children's children, ad bias goal tzedek b'mheir b'yaminu.
In commemoration of the second Yahrzeit of the passing of my father, Dr. Sheldon Meth, I thought I'd share a story that my dad actually wrote up. Shortly before he passed, my dad put together about 25 different anecdotes, personal stories about his personal life, his professional life, that he felt were very defining of his life. One of the stories he shared was something he would tell over all the time. This is what he wrote. After the First Gulf War, I attended a classified symposium on the subject of the war and lessons learned. One of the keynote speakers was General Charles Horner, who commanded the United States Air Force in that theater. Among many others, he told the following tale. There was a classified ground-based asset which was used during the war to help warn the Israelis where and when the Scud missiles would land. This asset was actually built 50 years earlier for an entirely different purpose. When they originally constructed that asset, they narrowed it down to 2 different locations a few kilometers apart. Both of those locations would have served the original purpose adequately, so they randomly picked one of them as the final location for that original purpose. It turns out, 50 years later, if they would have selected the other location, the asset would have been totally useless in protecting Israel 50 years later. What a coincidence, said General Horner. What hashgacha, thought I. My dad would always see God's divine providence, God's hand orchestrating the affairs of mankind. What seemed like a random, arbitrary decision 50 years earlier about where to install a military installation actually proved to be one of the defining elements for the survival of the Jewish people during the Gulf War 50 years later. It was a completely random act, right? Or was it God's providence, God's divine will, orchestrating and maneuvering the affairs of mankind to help bring about a salvation 50 years later? There's a remarkable essay written by Rabbi Isaac Sher, one of the great Musar thinkers of the previous generation. He points out that if you look in the Sukkot prayers, the special prayers that we recite on the holiday of Sukkot, the Hoshanas, one of the days we talk about the various descriptive terms about Jerusalem and the temple. We talk about the fact that the temple is the Even Shesiya, it's the foundation stone. We talk about Beis HaBachira, it's the chosen house. And then we recite that Jerusalem is Goren Arnon. It was founded as the Goren, as the granary, the silo of a man named Arnon. This is a reference to the fact that when King David originally purchases and occupies Jerusalem, the Temple Mount was occupied by a silo, a granary, by a Jebusite man named Arnon. And Rabbi Isaac Sher points out, when we go ahead and we talk about Jerusalem during this service, we speak about it in such lofty terms. Why are we incorporating within the praises of Jerusalem some historical factoid that Jerusalem before its founding was actually a granary of some fellow named Arnon? What's the significance of that? Rabbi Sher explains, there's a passage in the Talmud that explains that before Jerusalem was settled by the Jews, all of Israel, all the high mountaintops were used as places of avodah zarah, places of idolatry. And Tosos, one of the great commentaries, asks, if that's true, if all the hills, all the mountaintops were used as a place of idol worship, it would be so inappropriate, it would be so unfortunate, the place that would ultimately become the Temple Mount, the place for the Beis HaMikdash, if that were used for idolatry. How could it be that a place, a hilltop that's used for idol worship would end up being that Beis HaBachira, that chosen house, that place of the Beis HaMikdash, of the service of God? And Tosos explains, well, actually there was a prophecy, there was a message from God that hilltop, the hilltop that would ultimately be the place of the Beis HaMikdash, was never used for idolatrous purposes. Rabbi Sher asked, why did that happen? How did that happen? And he theorizes and suggests that decades, centuries earlier, that hilltop, the hilltop which would ultimately be the Beis HaMikdash, the place of the Holy Temple, for whatever reason, the Jebusites, well, they needed a granary, they needed a silo, they needed a place to store their grain. And randomly, coincidentally, they just picked the mountaintop which would ultimately be the Temple Mount. They randomly, coincidentally picked that mountain to go ahead and be the place to store their wheat and their grain. Rabbi Sher explains, was that a coincidence? Was that random? Or was that the hand of God orchestrating the events of mankind? The Jebusites needed a granary somewhere, and God ordained it that the Jebusites, Arnon, would go ahead and build his granary right there on the eventual spot of the Makam HaMikdash, the place of the Holy Temple. So that place would be pristine and pure for the Jews to go ahead and build the Beis HaMikdash, the temple for the service of God. Random locations, decisions that people make about hilltops, whether it be in Jerusalem or whether it be about military installations. There's no such thing as a random event. My dad lived his life that way. He always saw the hashgacha pratis, the divine intervention of God, orchestrating, maneuvering the affairs of mankind. Nothing happens by chance. That's how my dad saw the world. When we think about my father, think about the life that he lived, one of the inspirations that I have and that I hope we all have is to recognize all of the events in our lives, from the biggest of things to the smallest of details. Everything happens because of hashgacha pratis, because of God's divine intervention.
Yasher koach. At this time, we have the privilege to share a video recorded by Sheldon's brother, Rabbi Chaim.
Years ago, Sheldon told me over a vart that I thought would be appropriate. He said, it says, Kosher zivuga shel adam kriyas yamsuf. Now, obviously, this is not referring to it's kosher for a ben adam, because ben adam can't do kriyas yamsuf. It's not shaykh. It's a non-starter. It's an impossibility. So obviously, we're talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Welt asks, what's so hard for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to kriyas yamsuf? I mean, he did it, and what's the big deal? He just says, and it happened. So Sheldon said over, I don't know if it's his vart or he heard it from somebody that I don't remember. He said, kosher doesn't mean it's difficult. It means that it's complicated. It's intricate. What does that mean? What happened at Kriyas Yamsuf? Kriyas Yamsuf had to have Bnei Yisrael at the Yamsuf at a certain time, at a certain position, at a certain situation. The planning of that started long time before that. Okay, even before, but even by Yetzias Mitzrayim, they had to go out of Mitzrayim at a certain time, and Amalek had to come out to fight them or to scare them away from going this way instead going south at a certain time. They had to reach the Yam Suf at a certain time, and Paro and the nation had to get umgehitzt and get all excited about that the Bnei Yisrael left and he had to leave and it had to take an exact amount of time to get to where he had to go to. A lot of things had to happen before the Kriyas Yamsuf would happen at this specific time that it happened. Similarly, Harry Sheldon Zal was not nifta, but he went to the hospital, if I'm not mistaken, on Purim. And we just now had Purim, and it's much more obvious, the Yad Hashem, and the complicated, intricate planning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to do in the story of Purim, that everything had to happen exactly when it happened, how it happened, with who it happened, that Bidyuk, when Mordechai was sitting at the gate, Bixum and Serge came and they talked about whatever, and they weren't afraid to talk in the language that they thought that Mordechai didn't understand. And Esther had to be in the right place, and she had to be taken to the Beis HaMalchus, even though she tried to hide. And the Melech had to have a dream specifically on that night, and Haman had to come. Everything is so complicated and so intricate, and the planning of it had to work out to the T. And this is something that Sheldon was very, very well aware of the Yad Hashem and the planning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, and the bitzua and the execution of the things that he did, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, did, will do. And he saw the Yad Hashem in everything, from when he was at work trying to destroy the world, or trying to prevent the destruction of the world, and when he was driving to work learning Daf Yomi, and all the things that he did, and the natural wonders and the science and the things that he did, he saw Yad Hashem in every single step that he took. And we should learn from this, and we should take it with us, and we should understand and see the Yad Hashem in even the simplest things that we do, and everything that we do. And it should be a Meilutz Yosher, and for the family, and for the kids, and for Marcia and the whole family. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we should be Zeicha to Tchias HaMesim. We'll meet again when Mashiach comes.
Amen.
Yasher koach. In searching for a specific zuchus le'iloi nishmas, we considered many different memorials and eventually hit upon something that was very meaningful to Sheldon and Li'ibad l'chaim tovim, to Marcia, something that they witnessed in another community, a kol Hane'arim Tallis, And so a feature of our program today is a special presentation, COVID-friendly, little creativity, ingenuity required, but a precious dedication, and I will leave the rest of the intro to Marcia.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Rhine. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Yehuda Katz, thank you for hosting the Zoom and for putting up with my crazy emails for the past 2 weeks. And thank you to our videographers, my son-in-law, Rabbi Danny Kramer, who filmed Dovid's beautiful Siyum just this morning, straight from school. And to my nephew, Chaim Mateh in Israel, who filmed his father, Sheldon's brother, at the Kaver just a few hours ago. Dovid, I'm so proud of you. Zaidi would be so proud of you. He was so proud of all the many, many Siyumim you've made ever since you were, what, like 4 years old, something like that. And thank you to our 2 wonderful sons for your beautiful words. And Abba was so proud of you too, and proud of your sisters and all our in-law kids and all our children. And we're so happy that you are continuing in his traditions and carrying out his legacy. And Chaim, thank you so much for your beautiful words too. So speaking of fathers and sons, I'd like to start with a Tehillim from booklet 22 of the Tehillim Mechulak. This is the little booklet that I've been saying every Sunday at 9:30 for the past umpteen years, just said it this morning at 9:30. And booklet number 22, and you know, when you keep repeating the same words, the same psukim day after day, week after week, they become kind of your friends, okay? And you kind of look at like, how is this relevant to me? How can I apply this to my life? So booklet 22 starts with Perek Kuf Chav Zayin 127, and it's David HaMelech speaking to his son Shlomo. Shlomo, who's also known as Solomon, also known as Shlomo Zalman, for many generations before our Sheldon was named that way. And it says, and David tells his son, Im Hashem lo yivne bayis, if Hashem is not building a home, shav amlu bonebo. You can get all the construction workers you can, but they're doing it all for nothing if Hashem is not involved in the construction. And Im Hashem lo yishmar ir, if Hashem is not guarding the city, shav shakad shomer. Okay, you can appoint all the guards you want. It's not going to do you any good if Hashem is not supervising this construction and this protection. And everybody asks, like, you know, a lot of explanations of what is going on here. And the one that I'd like to focus on is that Dovid has spent many, many years amassing all these construction materials and precious gems and stones for what he wanted to build most in his life, and that would be the Beis HaMikdash. But he knew at the end that it's not going to be for him to build it. He's going to have to rely on his son to build it. And so he's talking to his son, to Shlomo, and he is giving him basically instructions. It's a blueprint for what you need to do in order to put all these materials together. And by extrapolation, we can also infer that this is a blueprint for all of us when we are building our shuls, our mikdash ma'ats throughout the whole world. And basically, we can say, you know, we can hire security guards to keep the terrorists out. But if Hashem is not protecting us, it ain't going to happen. Okay, we can fight our invisible enemies, our coronaviruses. Yes, we are following CDC guidelines. We're wearing masks. We're social distancing. We're having minyanim outdoors. We're doing whatever we can. But you know what? If it's really up to Hashem. It's His master plan that's really protecting us. So then a couple of psukim later, it kind of jumps to another topic. and it talks about Hine Nachlas Hashem Banim. Okay, the heritage, the legacy of Hashem is children. Sachar Pri Habaten, the reward is the fruits of the womb. And he compares the children to arrows, Kechitzim biyad gibor, like arrows in the hand of a strong man. Kain b'nei Hane'arim, so are the children of our youth. And he says, Ashrei hagever, praiseworthy is the person, Asher milei es ashbaso mehem, who fills his quiver with those arrows. Lo yevoshu, they will not be embarrassed. Ki yadabru es avim bashar, because those children, whatever, are going to be the ones who meet the enemies at the gate. So, and everybody's asking, what's the connection between building a Beis HaMikdash or building a shul and having children? Okay, so let's hold on to that question for a while and ask another question. If anybody asked you, what's the first thing you think of when you think, what's the thing that pops into your mind when you think of Sheldon? So my two learned sons, my brother-in-law Chaim, and Rabbi Rhine all touched on what many of his friends would say, and even what many of his colleagues would focus on. And they would probably tell you how smart he was, how brilliant, what a Talmud, he's both a Talmud Chacham and a scientist, how he saw the physics and the Torah as inextricably combined through Hashem's creation, and how he believed that Hashem is still in charge of every detail, as our other speakers so beautifully pointed out. But I'd like to focus on what two other groups would say, what the members of his Kehila and the members of his family. So starting with, if you're a shul member, you'd probably think of his davening, okay? Especially his davening on Yom Kippur, and most especially his Ne'ilah. I remember when my mother used to come for the Yomim Noraim, and she'd sit next to me in shul, and after Sheldon's Ne'ilah, her expression in Yiddish was, "Satget sitter devent." The walls were trembling, okay? And it's true, he really rocked the shul with his Ne'ilah. You could feel the vibes zapping across, the energy like electricity zapping across the room, and you could feel, we would all sit there as one, and this one is davening we're davening, this one needs a refuah shalema, this one needs a job, this one needs a shidduch, this one needs children, and we're all davening for each other, and all this zapping is just going to Sheldon, and he was feeling those vibes and he was channeling them, okay? And in particular, his last Yom Kippur is probably the most memorable. The whole Kehillah was sitting there trembling because we all knew about all his underlying conditions, the heart stuff, the kidney stuff, the dialysis, the medicines, and he was fasting all day. Ribbon Shalom, how was he going to stand up at the end of the day and do the kind of Ne'ilah he was known for? Well, guess what? He did a Ne'ilah that surpassed even all the other Ne'ilahs. And like on Motzei Yom Kippur every year, the people would go over to both of us and they would compliment him on his davening. And he always had the same answer, and he really believed it. He said that it all came not just from inside of him, okay? It just came from the whole community. He would say, he literally said that the community carried him. And so Yom Kippur for Sheldon was the embodiment of Yiras Shemayim, the fear of God. But if you talk to Sheldon's family and you ask them, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of your father, your Zaidi, your uncle, your brother, what would they focus on? So not so much the fear of Hashem, Yiras Hashem, they would talk about his love, how much he loved his family, how much he loved Torah learning, how much he loved davening, and being part of a vibrant shul and being part of a beautiful community like we are, that we've been fortunate to be in for well over 40 years. They would say how he loved serving as a role model, setting an example for his children on how to incorporate Torah into and davening into their daily lives, and into the way they looked at the world in general. And Baruch Hashem, as you can see, we're so proud that our children truly are outgrowths of the role model that Sheldon set for them. And they are the products of the time he took to learn with them, to daven with them, to take them to shul. And if you ask them which yontif would symbolize, would you associate with Sheldon, that embodied all that love that Sheldon had for Torah and children and Hashem and learning and everything, it would not be Yom Kippur. It would be Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah is the holiday, I think, that epitomized Sheldon's Ahavas Hashem. It's the yontif that synthesized all this love for his family, his children, his shul, the Torah. And I know for a fact that Sheldon's favorite part of Simchas Torah was Kol Hane'arim. And I know Sheldon and I both got that love from his parents, Rose and Irving Meth, and especially I think from my mother-in-law. They used to come for Sukkot, and my mother-in-law would stand next to me in Simchas Torah. And as we'd watch the Tallis being held up over all these beautiful children, I could feel the trembling in her, and I could almost read her mind, the emotions that would go through and the memories of Nebuch, all the children that she witnessed going to their deaths in Auschwitz. And when she thought that this was chas v'shalom, the end of the Jewish nation, and yet here she was standing in this shul of her son and watching her grandchildren under the tallis and watching all these beautiful little kinderlach. And, I think that those emotions, those vibes, she was sending them across the room, and I'm sure Sheldon picked up on them and he was feeling the vibes. And, for Sheldon, it was such a nachas to see all the shul's children under the tallis, where we are on Simchas Torah celebrating the continuity of Torah learning. And by doing so, we're exemplifying it to our children. And we're really instilling in them that the continuity of the existence of the shul, and basically that the children are the lifeblood of our shul. So as Rabbi Rhine mentioned, 2.5 years ago, Sheldon and I were lucky enough to be in Boca with our children for Sukkot, and it was at on Simchas Torah, come time for Kol Hane'arim. We were used to always seeing the members of our shul lifting up 6, 8, 9 different talosim to hold all the children under. In my son's shul, they held up this humongous tallis. We'd never seen anything like this. It turns out it's called a Kol Hane'arim tallis, and we were just so thrilled to see such a wonderful thing that we came away after Yontif. We said, we are going to do this. We're going to donate it to Southeast Hebrew Congregation. We're going to have one of those for our own shul. So and I know we came home and started researching it, and then I don't know what happened. Life gets in the way. We got sidetracked in different things, and it just didn't happen. And then a year later, we're in Vegas. Well, I'm in Vegas. Sheldon is no longer with us, and I'm in my son's kollel, and it's Simchas Torah, and I'm watching, and all of a sudden they're lifting up the talesim for Kol Hane'arim, and I go, oh my gosh, we never did the Kol Hane'arim tallis. And then in there I decided this is it. Before his first Yahrzeit, we will have a Kol Hane'arim tallis, and it's going to be dedicated to Sheldon's memory. So that's why the first Yahrzeit, we worked very hard to get it together. We had a program planned, everything was all set in place, and then boom, Corona hit. Okay, mamish, almost to the day, a year ago, just as we were about to have this program, and things started changing by the minute with this guideline, that guideline, and we suddenly realized we can't do this in shul anymore. Well, maybe we can move it to my backyard, but no, that didn't happen either. Didn't go in the backyard, and we had to scrub the whole plan. And then now here we are, a year later, finally trying to do this on a Zoom. Who knew from Zooms back then? So anyway, 2 weeks ago, just a few days after I got my second shot, Baruch Hashem, I decided I'm going to step foot in shul, and we're going to do a photo shoot of this tallis being unfolded and held up. So it was my first, it was Sunday after Mincha, I stepped into the shul. This was the first time I'd been in the shul for over a year. And I can't tell you how overwhelming it was for me. You know, I felt like making a shechiyanu, like, wow, I'm in my shul again. This is so cool. Of course, it was very weird. You had not too many people. They were all socially distanced. They're wearing the masks. And then there was this weird contraption that they've erected over the bima that will hold a sliding plastic partition that between the Baal Koreh and whoever comes up for an aliyah. And it was just so bizarre, but it was still, it's a wonderful thing to have witnessed. And so we were fortunate enough to get Dr. Hirsch Kamero to film all these crazy proceedings of them trying to lift the tallis up over this contraption. And after Dr. Kamero filmed it, my granddaughter, Rachel Kramer, with the assistance of my son-in-law, Rabbi Danny Kramer, put together a lovely video, which we're about to show you, and I will come back and speak to you a little bit afterwards. So Yehuda, if you can go ahead and show the video, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hirsch, Rachel, Danny, for that beautiful video. And thank you to all the regulars at the Sunday afternoon Mincha Minyan who really struggled to, was a ganze production. So in case you might have noticed, we had a border printed on the, embroidered on the tallis. And this was something Sheldon and I both had agreed on. It's the pasuk of Hamalach HaGoel, what we say with all our children every night when we put them to sleep. And the embroidery in the middle, I guess Sheldon never dreamed that his name would be in the middle, it was dedicated to him, but there it is. But underneath his name, you may have noticed that it's also dedicated to all the children who perished in the Holocaust, and specifically to the little brother that I never knew, Shlomo Nachum ben Yosef, Hashem Yikam Damo. And this was actually Sheldon's idea to do that. And when I was trying to put together the text for this, I came across many of the emails that he was actually sending at the time, doing the research and everything. And he actually had the Hebrew fonts printed all up, which thank God, because I don't do Hebrew fonts too well. And I just used that and expanded on that. So, so that's what you just saw. And now I'd like to just go back to the question of what's the connection in Tehillim 127 between building a Beis HaMikdash, building a shul, and having children. And as you may have deduced by now, the answer is that without children, you have no shul. You have no way of keeping that shul vibrant and keeping it alive. And so that's why it's so important to act as an example. Take our children to shul, show them how you learn, how to learn with them, daven with them, okay? Have chinuch programs like we have in our shul, Rabbi Shmuel Feldman's Motzei Shabbos Door Lador program. This is the essence of how we perpetuate the existence of a shul, how we have Hashem rest in that shul and then continue to rest there, be part of it for generations to come. And if you go to the next perek after 127, it ends with the famous pasuk that we all sing about all the time, Urevanim levanecha shalom Yisrael. We should all daven for, this is what we daven more than anything else, is we want to live long enough to see our children and to see them have children, and all of their future generations should live in peace. So let me end with one final thought. And that's that, you know, as we all know, we don't know what Hashem's plans are, okay? But we can't help but try to guess. You know, we give a guess. And the burning question to me is why did Hashem take Sheldon at such a young age? 68, he didn't even reach Dovid HaMelech 70 years, and certainly not, we all aspire to live to 120. And so many reasons come to mind. Possibilities. Maybe Hashem spared us this past year. You know, can you imagine with Sheldon's, the oxygen and the dialysis and the pills and the doctor visits and the fears of being all the underlying horror for both of us. I can't even imagine it. So Hashem spared us that. And even more, Sheldon would have been devastated not to be able to attend his minyanim regularly. It would have been horrible for him. So, you know, that was a chesed in some ways. And I'm sure there are plenty of other reasons that we don't know. But there's one more possibility I'd like to pose, and that goes back to the way he would daven on Yom Kippur and throughout the year for the whole community and for his family, like he was a vehicle for all our tefillos. And boy, did this year, we sure needed those kind of tefillos, let me tell you. So maybe Hashem saw that Sheldon would be more effective as a Melech Yasher up in Shemayim, even more so than here in the in Olam Hazeh. And he combined his tefillos in Shemayim with our tefillos over here, and also with the collective tefillos of all our ancestors davening together for the well-being of their descendants and all the people they've left behind. And this powerful combination, now we are seeing a little bit light at the end of the tunnel. And I can only imagine that maybe Hashem's been listening to all those powerful tefillos. So when there's a chus, let this tallis be a symbol of our hope for the future of our shul and shuls across the world, that we will live to see Urevanim Levanecha, Shalom in Yisrael, that will merit to see our children and our children's children gathering in shuls across the world, learning Torah with their parents, with their grandparents, and davening and gathering every year on Simchas Torah. Who knows, maybe even this year, Simchas Torah, under the Kol Hane'arim Tallis. Thank you so much.
Yesher koach, Marcia, thank you very, very much for that thoughtful and very tremendously meaningful presentation. I can recall that the last Simchas Torah that Sheldon was with us in Southeast, one before the one you described, he was honored by one of the Balabatim very thoughtfully with the Aliyah of Kol Hane'arim. So the last Simchas Torah in Shul, he was indeed so honored. And this is a very beautiful continuity, personally, and of course, generationally. We thank everyone for joining. We should indeed share good tidings, simchas, wonderful memories, and zuchusim. And we invite everyone to stay on a few moments if you'd still like to share with the family, thoughts, and greetings. Thank you again. Kol Tov.